Show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. Thank you for joining us. Today is January 1st, 2018. It's Monday. Welcome to the new year. I really look forward to this year. I think this year is going to be the year that we make a big difference. We stand up. We finally get our grip back, and we begin to take our government back. It's not going to be easy, but I think we have an opportunity to do so. Before we get into the show, I wanted to share with you a poem that I pulled out. I'm going to show this up to the camera. This is a book I read all the time on my YouTube channel, and I read it on my radio show here regularly, as many of my listeners know. It's called The Way of Life by Lao Tzu, translated by Witter Bynner. Lao Tzu was a poet and a philosopher and a statesman. And he was from the 600 BC era. They say he was born 69 years old at 603 BC. So I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I believe that. But number 67, and it is a good portend for the new year, and I wanted to share it with you. I read it last night on my YouTube channel, and I'm going to share it with you here. Everyone says that my way of life is the way of a simpleton. Being largely the way of a simpleton is what makes it worthwhile. If it were not the way of a simpleton, it would long ago have been worthless. These possessions of a simpleton being the three that I choose and cherish: to care, to be fair, to be humble. When a man cares, he is unafraid. When he is fair, he leaves enough for others. When he is humble, he can grow. Whereas if men like of today, he is bold without caring, self-indulgent without sharing, self-important without shame, he is dead. The invincible shield of caring is a weapon from the sky against being dead. So there you go. I thought that was a good way to start the year. So thank you for joining us. Today we have a new friend of mine, actually. He's a blogger, a person that I met very recently on YouTube. Billy Johnston, my longtime friend from the Post-Ignorance Project, said, you got to get him on. So his name is Gerard. Let me see how I say your last name. Gerard Kenyatte. So Gerard, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
And for those of you who are curious, I think Gerard is live streaming on Facebook. So, and I am actually video recording this, so we can have a video recording of it also. So, really appreciate it. You live where in Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania, yes.
So, how long have you been actively engaged in, quote, waking people up?
Oh, wow. So I guess that kind of begins with my wake up. And so I used to be a children's rights activist going back 20 years ago. And really, I guess my wake up came when I started looking at the legislation. And I started looking at things like the Welfare Reform Act. And I started to realize that a lot of the laws actually are schemes to actually take tax dollars from the American public and funnel them through various programs. And once I really started to realize that we were being played at pretty much every level, every party, I stepped away. I used to go and meet with the legislators, and we would do photo ops. We'd explain our case. We'd give them all the details. We'd read through the laws. We'd show them where the laws are hurting the general public, where they're hurting children. They would get the photo op, and they would go vote any way they wanted to. They'd smile in your face, they'd hug you, and
every study says that happens.
And after a certain period of time, you get to a point where you realize that you've got to take a different approach. And so, for me, that led me down a long path of realizing that I don't think that either party is a real solution for anything to bring back a sense of caring and logic, like you just talked about, in America, and that our problems really aren't so much political as they're internal. We don't care enough, and when you like the poet just said, when you do care, you don't have any fear.
Right.
But when you don't care enough, you have a lot of fear, and
exactly.
I think that, and it's that division between all these different groups in our country, and it's not just Democrats and Republicans, conservatives, liberals, progressives, all across the board. They're made up, unfortunately, of a lot of people who have an awful lot of fear because they're not caring enough about what's happening around the world, that's happening with our military, as well as what's happening within the United States. They don't care about
themselves. Let's just be clear. They don't really care about themselves. It starts with self-care, right? Most Americans are really in ill health because they don't give themselves enough water. So it's, let's be clear. You know what I mean? It starts with self-care.
That's a great topic. They
drink tap water. They don't buy $100 water filter so they can have, or they shower in unfiltered water. That we all know. There's a lot of tritium. They can't take out the tritium, but there's a lot of things you can take out. So it's about self-care, and that to the point of, for me, where I have come about this, I went through that phase of forget it, there's nothing we can do, and I went through different avenues. I think I've turned it around to, we don't have enough people actively engaged in our democracy. The reason our politicians can ignore it is because of their fear that they will not get reelected. They don't have enough people patting them on the back saying, stick with us. We'll keep you up against all the money that there is. Look how much money they wanted to spend. They attempted to spend, attempting to get Barack Obama not elected. Right? There was a lot of money. What happened was in the 2016 election, they basically had to rig the election. All the Democrats rigged it against Bernie. We had a fake election in 16 because the primary was stolen. The people on UCY chat room are probably going berserk. Here she goes again with the Bernie thing. The point is that we have got people not actively engaged enough when less than 25% of the populace doesn't even vote. Out of those 25%, less than 10% actively engaged. And of those 10%, most of them are repeat offenders. Most people do not even pay. They think putting a name on a ballot is plenty. They don't know who their city council is. They don't know who their county commissioners are, which really does impact them. They don't know who their water board. I challenge anyone listening to this show to contact your own water board member and see if they will call you back.
Yeah, so let me interject this let me ask you a question, because I think about this a lot. Do we truly have a democracy any longer? Looking at at some point, I'm hoping we did. It's elusive to me to find out where that democracy was, but do we actually have a democracy? And that's my first question. My other question would be, do we not have a democracy because we vote, or do we not have a democracy because enough people don't vote? Or is it both?
I don't believe we're living in a democracy, first off. I think that We're living in an authoritarian regime, frankly. We have enough people being shot in the streets to even not call it an oligarchy. It's not just a plain oligarchy like they have in some of the European oligarchic states. We have a pretty strong authoritarian regime where we have prisons for profit. But it is because we don't have enough people voting. If we had on January 20th, I guarantee you there's going to be millions of people in the street with signs to say impeach Trump. Because Traitor Trump has broken the emoluments clause, domestic and foreign emoluments clause from day one. He is not allowed, according to the Constitution, which we pretend we enact. This is a basic clause. He is profiting off of the presidency. That's against the law. 100. There's not been a president that's been allowed to do this. This is an outrage against who we say we are. Now, getting to a bigger point beyond him in our face breaking the law, because we don't have a democracy, is the fact that the military has taken over since World War II. We have a CIA that has an unlimited budget, an unaccountable budget. The CIA's budget is not accountable to Congress, not to the president, not to anybody. And they can do anything they want, and they do. They keep the wars going. We know for a fact that they have increased. They went to Afghanistan. The whole, and they had basically gotten away from it, and the United States military came in with their weapons and forced those farmers to plant poppy seeds. So this is not hyperbole. This is not like some conspiracy theory. These are real, honest truths.
These are facts. These are facts that the soldiers are coming back from Afghanistan, and they're saying. So it's not like any of this is hidden, which gets it kind of back to the problem you mentioned in the beginning. How did we even get here? How did we get to a place where we effectively have lost control of our country? We effectively lost control of our military. Our military is a that's up for hire to Wall Street and banks and corporations and people we don't even know.
Paperclip.
Absolutely. And so, but it all gets back to the point of we lost our country. And we lost our country, unfortunately, through both political parties. And this is why when I hear the word vote, I kind of get a little, I vote in every election, Lonnie. But, the thing that gets me, though, is I don't think our votes are effective. And I think it's partially because of what you're saying, too, which is, one, we don't have enough people voting in terms of the right people. The older generations, the wiser people. I think a lot of the countries walked away from the whole election system and voting because they lost total faith in it. They know the machines are rigged. They know that, for the most part, probably presidents are more selected than
Let's talk about the machines, right? The machines themselves. Why do we have machines? So that Michael Chertoff could get super rich and become a billionaire. That's why we had the machines. That is the answer, is to, we don't need machines. We didn't need machines before. We don't need them now. That's not how you run a democracy. And the fact is, the United States has not upgraded their machines since they got introduced. Do you realize that? There's actually now a piece of legislation that's been introduced into the floor of the Senate to actually demand that we upgrade our machines before 2018. So what do you think the chances of that passing is between now and 18? Zero. Zero, right? Well, and there is a reason why.
Tell me why.
I mean, because it makes them feel like people are doing something. You know what I mean? And for me, see, the reason I really enjoyed talking with you and asked you on this show is because you're on the opposite end of the country and we're both Americans. You and I are engaged in this process of speaking publicly for the same reason. I don't know how old you are, but you look over 40. You know what I mean? I'm 62, so I'm sort of at what they've called an older America, right? And I mean, I'm outraged. I had my come to Jesus moment when Bush openly stole the election in 2000. That's when I went, when not one senator would stand up with the Black Caucus and ask for an investigation. When Nancy Pelosi took impeachment off the table in 2004, that's when I knew the Democratic Party was in on the gig. Honestly, from 2000 to 2004, I thought, well, maybe they were just wanting to keep the rule of law and they didn't want to, like they were going along with the program. But honestly, when they gained control of the House, and Nancy Pelosi was the one of two women who saw the torture tapes. One of two women. Nancy Pelosi took impeachment off the table. Jane Harman wrote the Homegrown Terrorist Act, which I don't think many people know, but the Homegrown Terrorist Act states that it is the American corporations are a vital interest to the United States, so that if you and I decided to start a No Work Monday, for example, to move some legislation around or to change something, whoever organizes that could go to jail and be deemed a terrorist.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because you're touching my profits. How dare you citizens actually come after the profits?
I personally think we need to, I really think that we need to revoke the Unpatriot Act. And with the Unpatriot Act, if we can revoke the Unpatriot Act, the foundation of the NDAA goes away. And then if you did that, we could get the Homegrown Terrorist Act revoked. But this all speaks to the fact that they are eating our arms off.
They're eating our arms off, and we're shaking salt and pepper on our arms for them. And we are giving them the fork and the knife, and we're setting the table, and we're saying, please, sir, I don't want any more. You can eat more. The reverse of Oliver. But we're doing this. And this is where I get to a point where, I half the time, Lonnie, I'm flipping out. I'm like you, and I'm like, you politicians, And then I stop, and I'm like, you know what? But we keep putting them back in office. We keep doing this. We see the fact that they're all doing the same thing.
It's all fear-based. Yeah, that's why we do it.
And they're like their buddy. They're all doing the same things together, and they're trading off good cop, bad cop, good cop, bad cop. And so I think at a certain point in time, we have to step back and breathe and say, you know what? If it looks like a horse, it smells like a horse, maybe it actually might be a horse. And the two parties are totally interlocked and totally colluding. And so I think we got to, there's so many issues. We do need to get rid of the Unpatriot Act. And I love how you said that. I caught that one. The Unpatriot Act. But there's a lot of laws we have to get rid of. And I think if we can focus on the bare base, what's wrong with our country, and the fact that we've allowed greed to pretty much make every decision for us, then we can start to talk about what laws have to be revoked. We can start to talk about what politicians need to go, right?
What would be your first law? What would be your first thing that you would have fundamentally? Let's just take the Unpatriot Act off the table, and let's take those two new ones off. What would be the ones that you would have? I know what I would say, so let's see what you would say. What would you say has to go first?
That's so delicious. Oh my goodness. Oh, which law would we get rid of? Honestly, if I had to start with something, I would actually have to start with. And I guess there are a couple ways to do it, but the way the DEA schedules medication, the way the DEA schedules the war on drugs. I think the war on drugs is the first big one. And the reason why that's the first big one in my heart, I have a lot of friends who've come through that system. And there are a lot of people.
Don't we all?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are there who should not be there. We have millions of American citizens, Lonnie, who could be voting, right? A lot of citizens who have been done wrong, who were peaceful. And we'll talk about the majority of those offenders are, 60% are nonviolent, victimless crimes. And so I think in terms of getting people who know our system is sick, the first step for me, I think, is in getting our political system back is we have to get those people out of prisons. We need to get them voter ID cards. We need to explain why portions of their lives have been completely taken away from them because, I don't know, they were carrying a dried plant and they're in prison for 20 years when someone raped someone is out of prison in 5 to 10.
Child molesters usually at 18 months.
And it's nonsensical from the top to the bottom. And so I think the first step is we need a bigger army of people who know the system's sick. I don't know that we need initially more voters. We need more voters who are informed and know that our country is upside down. So I think that might be my first one. There are too many kids there that shouldn't be there.
I think, you know what, maybe you're right. I have often thought my first one that we would revoke would be the subcontracting of our military. Who the first one that did that was Dick Cheney talked Johnson into subcontracting the military in the Vietnam for the first time.
Yeah.
The military is at the core of the destruction. The military has basically taken over our country. This is the interesting thing. This is why our Constitution said the president should not have military leaders around them. And our lockstep Congress clicked their heels and said, Sieg Heil, and allowed traitor Trump to surround himself with liars. And really, he didn't surround himself with honorable military men. Mad Dog Mattis is a psychotic, crazy murderer. And, you know, they are destroying young men's lives in our military. But going back to your point about the drugs, you know, I mean, the legalization of marijuana is sweeping the country. And here in Oregon, when marijuana got legalized, our governor let out every single person who had a conviction for marijuana. Every single conviction. They were all let out, and it was exonerated from their records.
Oh my God!
So that was a big step in Oregon, and that was quite unusual. But that's what they did here.
I heard about that. Is he still alive?
Yes. And I think it was a she.
I thought I saw the news, and sometimes I don't know what to believe anymore. I read the news, and I said that doesn't really sound right. It sounds like somebody cares in Oregon.
Yes. Well, actually, they actually do care because we still have a lot of greenery. See, I think the fact that you don't have greenery goes along with not caring. The farther away you get away from the earth, the more disconnected you get from your human roots.
Perhaps the scarier you become.
Well, yeah, and fear is a big motivator. They use fear all the time. That's why they have commercials. Frankly, the prisons for profit is all about fear. I mean, it is a slave trade. It's a legalized slave trade.
Oh, it is. It is.
So, I mean, and frankly, it was a way to break up the burgeoning black family, which the black culture, when the civil rights movement really changed the world's position and the Americans' position about how we viewed black families. It really knocked them off their socks. They went right after them to stick them all in jail and start destroying their basic subculture. I mean, the whole, talk to me about the welfare thing, the whole thing when welfare got started. I mean, do you know, this is an interesting thing most people are not aware. Do you know who the first female self-made millionaire was in the United States?
No, who is that?
Madam C.J. Walker. She was the first child of freed slaves. She became a millionaire in 1900. And the reason we don't know about her is because of Du Bois. He made a serious point of contacting all the newspaper editors to not have her name included in all the activism that she was involved in. For real.
Yeah, well, no, and that does bring back.
But that was just about misogyny, and he was one of those people, you know, who felt like we should give freedom to black people in incremental. This is why he's so revered by the white people.
Well, yeah, you know, but I think it's deeper than that, because to me, I like to stay away from the race topic because I think sometimes it misleads us, and what I mean by that is it's about greed, right? It's about always taking someone who's on the bottom and using them to make money with, right? And at that time in America, it was the blacks that were there. But who is it today? Today, it's the blacks. It's still minority, right? It's still minorities, but it's also immigrants. It's Hispanics. It's a war on poverty, right? You know, there are a lot of white Americans across the United States in mid-America who are suffering, right?
The fact is, when you look at the statistics, white America is much harder hit in lots of ways, and people don't want to admit it.
Well, when you
say you like to stay away from race, I don't think we need to exclude anything because it is part of our history and part of our conversation.
Well,
and
so,
it has to be, because we don't know. I mean, the first self-made millionaire in this country who was a female was a black woman, the first child of freed slaves. Her name is Madam C.J. Walker. She was an awesome human being. If you read her story, she did more for people across the board than many of the socialites that she began to hobnob with, right? And she liberated people. You know what she did? She actually invented the network marketing deal. She invented the program that still is being used by Mary Kay products today. In fact, Mary Kay mimicked her product line, mimicked her whole product line, and mimicked her whole selling market. Right. So there's a lot of things that we can talk about, but for me, getting back to how do we take our country back, I think it matters that people need to embrace our duties as Americans. We say we have a constitution. Let's demand it. I mean, if they're not going to answer us when we stand in their halls, like we saw all those handicapped people, all those people who were in wheelchairs being hauled out by security guards. To me, that is an outrage. You know what I mean?
Right. And it's a good direction for this to go, right? So for me, everything is about unity, right? Everything is about there are 99% of us, right? There are more of us than there are of them. And if we can stop using things that we stop feeding into things they used to divide us, right, we can do anything we want any day. When we can demand anything from our government, or even get our government back from Wall Street and banks at any time we want. Like, all these atrocities occur because certain things trigger emotion that get people grouping up in divisive groups. And this is what I'm saying. I like to stay away from and it's not race, it's any divisive things that have been utilized to separate Americans. So we know they're poor whites, they're poor blacks. And to me, it doesn't matter how many of each there is. If there's one starving kid in America, we got a lot of changes to make. And so, and they do it with the Muslims and the Christians. They do it men and women, conservative, liberal. And so I like to stay away from divisive things, because when people don't get triggered into emotional topics, they can agree on certain common things. Like there shouldn't be 2 million starving people in Yemen right now, right? You know, we shouldn't be engaged in wars all over the planet.
Fukushima's going on for what, 7 years?
Exactly. Like it
has not
care.
Been stopped.
Right.
Hanford has not been stopped.
Exactly.
The people in St. Louis are still being poisoned.
Yes.
Chris Busby posted a photo up on Facebook yesterday. He was standing on railroad tracks right next to the Westlake landfill. His Geiger counter caught 900 units per hour, 900 sieverts per hour, minimum 500. And there are people living within 3 miles of that site. And yes, they are chronically sick. Many of them end up dying of sad diseases. That's what got me going on the St. Louis landfill thing, was I saw a picture of a child sitting in a hospital bed. Like, how, and like, exactly like you said, these people have engaged. They've gone down to Washington. They've testified. They get the little pat on the back. Even Barack Obama said, yeah, well, we know what's going on in St. Louis. Lip service. And what happens now? Roy Blunt, the senator from Missouri, his son works for Republic Services, who owns the Westlake landfill.
Yes. But it makes sense, though. It all makes sense. But we can't get to the place.
It makes sense? I don't think it makes sense.
Well, it makes sense from an identity politic, dividing up people, making them stupid perspective, right? They use certain names and keywords that get you to fall in love with politicians, that it makes them beyond reproach. And so, oh, no, you can't say anything bad about Obama. Oh, no, you can't say anything bad about Trump. And when people get locked into these identity politics, even from a Democrat, Republican perspective, or, you know, if you say anything, oh, well, it means I got to be on this side because you said my keyword and it triggered this and I can't say anything negative about this person. And that's how they keep everything exactly the same. We have to get to a point where we talk policies, not presidents, not people, not personalities, but the policies. And everyone agrees you can look at the jet stream, and a third grader can tell you that the jet stream blows radiation from Fukushima this way. If you live this way,
right, exactly.
It's not going to go good for you. So,
well, actually, if you live anywhere in the northern hemisphere, it's not going to go good for you. Let's be clear.
Right, but these are things everybody agrees on, and whenever people start to get together and they start to talk about, you know what, this is bad, we should stop it. They'll always throw something divisive, triggering in to push people for Trump back over there, people for Obama or Clinton back over there, and then nothing changes. And so I think our key to changing things is people who they have to start talking to their others. The ones that are just told are beyond reproach and we can't talk to the left or we can't talk to the right. All of this directly is going to affect the next generation. It's affecting us on the way out, but our kids are going to have to live with continuing to hand over the keys to the world and the keys to America to the same groups that are running both parties.
See, this is the interesting thing is when people take on these political divides that I have found is when you get to the root of why they are on that position, it's almost identical to why they're on the other side. The people on the other side, they all feel like they're standing up for the right thing. This person is standing up against the, quote, deep state. I think fundamentally most Americans know the military has taken over. I think fundamentally most Americans realize that our product, our number one product in the United States is war, murder, and death. That's what we produce. I mean, if the reason we keep building more weapons, the reason we keep the industrial military complex is the politicians are afraid if they close these bases. How many bases do we have around the world? Way too many.
Admittedly, it was a couple hundred, right? Admittedly.
Well, the black sites go back to the CIA black sites, right? So we don't know what they've got. Like, we do know they are torturing people. I mean, there's just so much fundamentally wrong with what we say there is. And I think that's what drives me and you is because we want people to, whether you get involved, this is my position, whether you get involved in politics and want to talk to your elected officials and vote and do all you can to change the Constitution and enforce the Constitution. Like right now, I really believe we need to stand. If we're going to hang on to a shred of our Constitution, we have got to get this Congress to start impeachment hearings on Traitor Trump about the Emoluments Clause. That's the number one thing. All the other charges that have come up against him, obstruction of justice, we don't know. I mean, and the fact that Nancy Pelosi says we have to wait for Mueller is apples and oranges, as has been said many times, because Mueller's looking at a criminal investigation. We're talking about upholding the law. The basic premise of how we run our Constitution. Now, if we're going to give up on that, then who cares? Like, let's just click our heels and say Sieg Heil. Put our little swastikas on.
Yeah, and so I hate the word politics. I hate the word politics because I don't think any of this is political, right? I think when you're not murdering people all over the planet, when you're not throwing people in shackles and cages all over our country and everywhere else, that's political, right? When you talk about the little agendas, when you're doing these things, our biggest issue is human rights. Our biggest issue is human life. And so I don't think we can even get to a place where we even talk politics because our problems are so much bigger than that. Until we care more for human life than we do for politics or politicians or the little shiny things that we can get, then nothing matters, right? And so it's like you said earlier, it's about caring and not having any fear. And the first step up in a place of unity is agreeing we shouldn't be murdering people for money. And that's the military-industrial complex, what you just said. We spend the lion's share of our GDP on making massive metal machines to go around the planet and murder people. And to me, it's not a party thing. It's across the board, and all presidents have done it. Congress, as far back as I can remember, voted for this nonsense. And so for step one, I think we have to stop agreeing with groups that only come up with violent solutions to go murder people to solve problems. I think that's step one.
Well,
and I don't think it's a party discussion. I think that's across the board.
Well, I don't think that party is politics.
First.
I think party is a kind of a false thing. I'm going to read to you what the definition of politics is, because everything is politics. When they say politics is local, it is. Politics is really the art or science of government. It is how do we govern ourselves. It's how we do it, the total complex relations between people living in a society. So it really does matter. I think that everything is politics. It gets down to political everything, and because that's how we govern ourselves. There's a lot of anarchists. See, the problem with international relations is that it's anarchic. What you have your own sovereign state, and sovereignty means you have the use of complete authority to use whatever control of military force you want within your own state. That gives you sovereignty. But what happens is, outside of your own sovereignty, it's complete chaos and anarchy. Governments can do what they want because there's no one to stop them. This was the idea behind the UN, right, is that we'd all get together. I mean, the UN has its own big problems, but it was an effort in the 20th century to, okay, we're going to hold all these anarchic states accountable to each other. Well, when you're being run by the industrial military complex, that all of that is just a sham. I mean, there's a great book that was called America at War, I think it was. I've read it maybe, 10 years ago now, or maybe 8 years ago. But it basically talked about how America has been at war since its inception. We've only had 3 or 4 years where our government was not at war. So we have had a dependence. So our politicians are like Pavlov's dog. They're sort of, think about every single city and town in this country. If we shut down the industrial military complex and said, okay, we're not building weapons anymore. We're not going to do it. We're going to bring our troops home. We're going to start building up America's factories. We're going to start making things. We're going to build our own cores. We're going to make our own textiles. We're going to figure out how to remediate the pollution. We're going to heal our waters. We're going to make that our big industry. If we did that, we wouldn't have anybody in Congress because we'd see a bunch of them accidentally suicided, right?
Well, and there's no money in that. There's no profit in helping people. There's no profit in working on infrastructure. There's no profit in using automation to help people, like you talk. And I love the idea of retooling and rekitting these factories for these massive murder machines that we're making, and use them to make automation to grow food, to 3D print houses, to do all the things that people need to be done. But there's no profit in that. And the sad yet funny thing about that, it's probably funny yet sad, is that most Americans agree with that. And that's what most want. But we can't get there because they're fighting over politicians, right? They're fighting over their parties. They're fighting and I think there's something about this Coliseum mentality, right? There's something about the NFL mentality wherein, I'm voting this way because my hope is in my party. And so if my party doesn't win, I have no hope. So my whole goal every election is to make sure my party wins. And for me, it becomes bragging rights in the Vindicaria because my party won. We beat you guys. They're not going to do any damn thing that I asked them to do. They're not, and the little things that they do, they'll make sure that it's corrupt, and they'll add little segues into the law so that money is just being funneled from the taxpayer. But they never get what they want. And so, at Lonnie, in some ways, sometimes I think about identity politics, and I think there's a sort of a mental illness component to it. I think there's some trigger that people tend to have wherein if they place their hope in a person or a politician, then it triggers them to automatically, whatever you say, if it's against that person, they flip out, right? And so I have a lot of friends who voted for Trump, and I have a lot of friends who voted for Clinton. And I try to stay away from those two particular words because I find anytime I use those words, no matter what I say next, it can be feed the homeless. Trump said he's going to feed the homeless. Everyone flips out. Oh my God, Trump's going to feed the homeless. That's horrible. And anytime I say, but it's the same way. It's this total love or total hate for a personality.
Let's be clear, Trump is not going to feed the homeless. That's not in his agenda.
So this is okay, but this is what I say. I think that Trump, like Obama, like Clinton, like all of them, I think they become politicians because they want people to clap for them. I think they want to be popular and they want to be famous and they want to go down in the history books. And so I think every president, any president, would actually become what the American people wanted if the American people would stop fighting over tiddlywinks and little silly things and stand up together on certain particular topics. So do I think, I won't say Trump's going to feed the homeless because everyone's going to go in their identity politic corners, but I'll say any president, if they think the majority of Americans are going to clap for it and stand up and cheer in the streets, they're all showmen. To me, they're all a little narcissistic. There's a little psychopath something in there. I don't think that you can send drones around the world to murder people and be a normal person. So, but they all will, if they think people are going to show up in the streets and cheer for something, they'll do it. But we can't seem to break down the divisive things that they use to divide us up. It's a genius thing, Lonnie. Divide and conquer. I mean, they actually are building an empire all over the world by simply dividing Americans over things like healthcare. This is why I don't want to talk about healthcare, because when you're murdering people and you got people in Yemen that don't even have food and they're saying that this is the greatest famine in the last 100 years is happening in Yemen right now.
It was done intentionally too.
It's done intentionally, and we're all sitting here talking about healthcare. But no, let me say it right. Not universal healthcare. We're talking about for-profit healthcare. Right. We're arguing over giving health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies as much money as possible while people are starving and dying. And I don't think that is a logical conversation for any human being.
With our tax dollars.
With our tax dollars.
But that is the epitome of where you go when you have a country that's being run by the military. I mean, for me, I think where we lost it was when we had Operation Paperclip, when we had the Manhattan Project. We started to live in secrecy and accept a secret government. That's when they really took off. That's when, me personally, and I've said this a couple times on this radio show, I think that both Barack Obama and Trader Trump have been implanted into the political system by the CIA. The difference between the two is Obama took it seriously. He thought he was really going to be this great leader, you know what I mean, which I guess he did in terms of a political history. He has been. But, you know, Trump has just blatantly looked at it and said, yeah, we can make a lot of money. Let's go. I don't think he expected to win. I think he thought he was going to be the throwaway for Clinton to get in office. And she did something really, we don't know what happened, but something happened that made the oligarchs really mad. And they decided to kick her off at the last minute. And that's why Comey came out and destroyed her credibility at the very last second. If Comey had not come out, we would have President Clinton right now. And, you know, for all intent and purposes, I could not vote for either one of them, frankly. But I think, frankly, it gets down to even a deeper issue than just one side or the other, Clinton or Trump. It gets down to Americans really are so easily controlled and believe that their lives are comfortable. They think it's normal to be struggling with rent. They think it's normal to be eating food from McDonald's that makes you sick because you can afford it, right? They've destroyed our food supply. Yep. They basically, the fundamental thing is, it's interesting you bring up Yemen because really they are destroying people. Not the kinds of weapons we're dropping on these people are going to cause catastrophic harm. We're dropping depleted uranium weapons on people. So we are bombing the planet with depleted uranium weapons, which will cause sterility and cause the land to be sterile. Yeah. So we have a huge comeuppance, and I'm actually looking forward to 2018 because I think this is going to be the year when a lot of Americans are beginning to I hope, this is my hope for the year, is that Americans are going to stand up and say, wait a minute, you know what? We deserve a healthier planet. We deserve a more responsive government. We deserve to have what we consider to be our Constitution upheld. We have to have, even if the military's taken over, we have to have the basic shreds of it upheld. This is why I'm going to be on the streets on January 20th. Come January 20th, I'm going to be one of the 10 million people out in the streets. And the Democrats are going to quake in their boots, and so will the Republicans, because they're going to go, oh, man, maybe we ought to take this seriously. I don't know if they will.
I hope so. But so I want to go back to something that you said. And I think that you hit a very key point, and we don't talk about secrecy enough.
Oh, right? Man.
I think that a lot of what we're facing can be derailed if we pass one simple law, and that is political body cameras. I think if all politicians wore body cameras like we force police officers to wear, I think all of this would come to
an end very quickly. Can you
imagine, just think about this for a second. We got to get this legislation passed. If we pass the political body camera act of 2018, you know what would happen? Immediately they and so this thing is on 24/7. You don't get maybe we'll let them have like a little 20-minute 30-minute conjugal thing. I don't want to see that. But if we knew everyone they meet with, everything that they say, everything that they do, because it's all on our tax dollars, they all work for us. And because the majority of America absolutely does not trust their government. We are in the lowest trust of government era that we've ever been in.
Rightly
and so,
so
if you put body cameras with microphones on everybody who works for us, I guarantee you this will come to a hill overnight. So I think you're right. I don't think they deserve secrecy anymore. I am so on your program with you. I think that you secrecy are for people you trust. They're for people you trust. You know, and once you determine that your government almost always lies to you about everything, that there are powers in the government that actually can kill a president, JFK, and get away with it, I think that you lost your rights to secrecy.
They killed 3,000 people in the Twin Towers. Let's be clear, and got away with it.
And
the military the day that it happened, I was on the West Coast. So I woke up at about 6:30, and at 7:30, my daughter yelled, "Mom," her boyfriend was in New York. She's like, "Mom, there was a big bomb in New York." I turned on the television. From 7:30 in the morning until 11 in the morning, this narrative changed, completely changed from this is an accident to this, there was a bomb that went off in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
From there, they were warned, the FBI was warned by a prisoner being held in Dutch prison, to, oh, we found their passports 3 miles away. That was how coinky-dinky.
Oh, my goodness.
Here's their passport. I mean, that was just like the most hilarious thing in the world. I actually broke out with laughter when they tried to put that one on us. So, and Americans will still, to this day, like my friend Jenny, who doesn't talk to me now because I refuse to stop talking about Fukushima, said, I know you've researched this, but if I believed you, I would have a nervous breakdown. So I'm going to choose to believe what their story is.
That's true. And I'm glad she said that to you. And I'm glad you said that out loud on camera, because that is why a lot of our brothers and our sisters, our family, our friends, they're afraid, which is how you started the program. Right. They have fear. And so right. I don't think that the very few people who still think 9/11, we got the true story, and the very few people who think that JFK was shot by one guy, that you can kill the most powerful man in the world with one guy and one gun. I think the people that really still follow that narrative, they're people who are so scared of admitting the truth. It breaks down so much of their lives that are built up on these narratives that they refuse to accept it. And this is why I'm saying we have more of a mental illness problem in our country than what we're willing to admit. I think that people are petrified, are totally petrified.
Well, we do have a mental illness problem. Do you know that one of the first symptoms or reactions that happens from constant exposure to low levels of radioactivity is schizophrenia and diabetes. So those two diseases have exploded. So what's happened since World War II, since the age of fission started, when they discovered the nuclear stuff, was they have systematically infiltrated other avenues so that we're not allowed to talk about radioactive contamination. You're looked at as if you're a complete lunatic. You're not allowed to blame diabetes on radioactive exposure or schizophrenia. In fact, if you say you're not taking pharmaceuticals, people look at you. I'm 62 years old. I call it the American Murder Association. I don't go to two things I avoid: the cops and doctors. If I can not go to them, I mean, in my view, they're both murderers. I don't trust either one of them, and I don't believe in any of their stuff.
Lonnie?
I think that they're so far off the mark of healthy human life. But again, it goes back to what you said, profit.
Lonnie, you're going to become one of my best friends. I love you to death. I love what you just said. That's the American Murder Association. And, so yeah. And I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry, so I used to work within the belly of the beast. But then again, I worked for a lot of big corporations that were, I call the merchants of death. But so my take on that, and it's interesting. We have to spend time talking about the radioactive component after a while. But I think that a lot of people, what they don't pay attention to when it comes to the pharmaceutical drugs, the way they chemicalize our entire society, all of our food system, all of that. I think it gets back to what you were indicating with the radioactive stuff, is that now that we've discovered epigenetics, we know that the environment. Why don't you
define what that means, epigenetics?
Okay, so back when they mapped the human genome, because after we be able to make blue people and super soldiers, we can make you tall as you want to be, and so. But what happened is, after they've determined that human beings have about 26,000 genes. They would flip a gene, but the gene would flip back. And they couldn't figure out why. They thought that DNA, actually, they could just flip genes and they can make anything they want. Well, to come to find out, there is an environmental component to DNA. That DNA is just like a card catalog. It's just like a database. But there's something called epigenetics, which actually controls what genes get flipped, when, and why. And so as an example, the example I like to put out there, and so when you're talking about the pharmaceutical drugs and radioactive anything, epigenetics actually looks at your environment when a cell is getting created and says, okay, I live in a radioactive environment. I'm going to die in 30 years, so I don't need to fight cancer. I don't need to fight leukemia. I don't need to do with this. We don't need all these components. We need to quickly breed because we're about to die. So it's a survival component. It actually looks at your environment to determine what genes get flipped. And this is why when you take synthetic pharmaceutical drugs and they're all throughout your body, the cells that are getting created at that time, they're actually flipping genes that are not supposed to be flipped. And so we know that epigenetics and the environment are dictating what these chronic illnesses are being displayed or coming out. And so I hadn't paid any attention to the radioactive part of it. But what I encourage people to do, if your doctor tells you that you need to be on this drug for the rest of your life or any extended period of time, you can ask your doctor about epigenetics. They won't be able to respond to you because a lot of it's cutting edge and
they need to listen to Joel's show, the show right before ours, before the first cup. She talks about this quite a bit. It's awesome. If you haven't listened to it. It's everything.
No, I haven't, and I have to, but it's everything. And people, and this is why I push holistic living, natural living, as much as possible, because the compounds and the synthetic drugs and the radiation, these things that are going in our bodies, they are modifying DNA. They are changing us at the DNA level. And this is why most people are hearing from their doctor this common phrase now, we've done all we can. It's because...
that's what they told me when I was in my mid-30s. I had very severe arthritis, and I had alopecia, and I had very bad female problems. They wanted to put me on Prozac so I could manage it. And I'm like, I'm not going on Prozac. And I just sort of suffered for a few years, and then a friend of mine in my office mate, paid for my very first visit to go see Dr. Bob Heron. He's a kinesiologist in Las Vegas, and you guys can find him and go there. If you have a chronic disease, it's worth the airplane trip. Within 2 years, my arthritis was gone. Within a month, my female problems were gone. I saw him literally with my daughter on one of our visits. She had hay fever. She was suffering. I didn't know you could fix hay fever. In one visit, she became unallergic to cats, and she got over her hay fever. One visit. My other daughter was a foreign exchange student, Lennon. She was a foreign exchange student to Russia. 2 days before she was going to go to Russia, she's like, Mom, check this out. She had this big lump on her hand. She had a big cyst. I freaked out. I didn't want her to go to Russia and have them cut her hand open. So I took her to the urgent care place. They wanted to cut her hand open, and she flipped out and started screaming. Like I've never seen. She was a very well-behaved straight-A student, and she ran around the room and wouldn't let them touch her. And she wanted to see Dr. Bob. I said, okay, great. We'll go see Dr. Bob. I called him. He's like, yeah, make an appointment for tomorrow. Bring her down to the office right now. He sat her on the table. Within 20 minutes, the cyst on her hand was gone in a half an hour, more than 50%. By the morning, it was 100% gone. She never had another cyst, right? So there is the hugest lie in our country that we have the best medical care in the world. We, in fact, have the worst. Among the first world nations, our health care is actually the worst medical care.
Because we don't have healers anymore. We don't have doctors. We have mostly chemists. And that's the biggest issue with the American Murder Association, is they've actually turned our healers into chemists. And chemists who actually don't know what they're doing, unfortunately, because the doctors are as lost in this as everybody else. They're just as sick as everybody else. And we knew this a long time ago, right? Because we knew that when you took people who are on these medical cocktails, 26 different drugs, and magically they stop taking all their drugs, and magically their ailments go away and they get better. Right. The human body is always trying to repair itself. It's always trying to fix itself. And if we stop modifying the DNA that's screwing everything up, the human body is capable of a lot of things. But this gets back to our whole conversation today, which was sick people need government. They need an awful lot of government. They need an awful lot of health care. And they've convinced everyone that their bodies are ailing and that they are so sick and they need all of this help and support and medication. And so people
it's
who
for
are
profit.
sick,
Let's
it's for
be
profit.
Clear.
Yeah,
it's not about health care. It's about people for profit. That's all it is. He's using us, like I said in my intro, assets on a balance sheet. That's what we are. Yeah. Because the reason Dr. Circus, I'm going to be putting up his interview soon again. I interviewed him. There are simple household things that you can take to get over many, many ailments. We don't need it, but because they cannot make a profit off of us, they keep us sick and tethered to their machine. And that's one of the things we can do is free ourselves by taking control of our health and our lives. I see that we're at maybe a minute left here, Jerome.
All right.
So it's been actually really awesome. You'll have to come back and share the hour with us again.
Anytime.
I enjoyed this conversation because we're like-minded. You know, I mean.
So the funny thing is, that's what truth does. You don't have to have the same background, the same party, the same part of the country or the world. When you start looking at the truth and you're doing critical thinking, we all arrive in a very similar place.
Right. And we all act out of love. This is the issue, is that really what we really must do, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us, is really open our hearts and really act out of love. And like Carl Grossman said, whatever you think you should be doing, say yes to it. Don't say no anymore. Like, we have been trained to say no to ourselves. It is extremely important for us to say yes to our intuition, yes to our self-love, yes to everything. And so you've been listening to Jerome. Tell me your name again, Kenyatte.
Gerard Kenyatte.
Gerard Kenyatte. Thank you, Gerard. And people can find you on Facebook, and I guess you're live streaming. I hope you come back and join us. I encourage everybody, put your courage feet on. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.